Hi guys, it's me again. Yeah, here we go with the last of the countries kind of thing. So I may have to do this in parts as the script is that long kind of thing. As yeah, it's like there's 13 pages. So yeah, sorry that's a little late, but here we go as there's references to Taiwan in Chinese courts. Got a record dating back to the 3rd century BCE. First recorded contact between China and Taiwan was in 239 CE, when the Chinese emperor sent a 10,000-man mission to Taiwan to explore the island. And a couple of hundred years later, in 605, China sent another expedition which brought back to China several Aboriginal people from Taiwan who were taught Chinese. And a follow-up mission did go back to Taiwan to gather more information. And during the Yuan dynasty of 1206 to 1368, when the Mongols ruled China, the Penghu or Penghu Islands in the Taiwan Straits were brought under China's control. And in 1430, the Ming dynasty's famous explorer Zheng He or Qin Ho landed in what is now Taiwan and obtained from the Aboriginal people herbal medicines that were said to have miracle powers. Meanwhile, believed to be as early as 7th century, Chinese fishermen visited the Penghu Islands, and probably some farmers settled there and on Taiwan itself. And in any event, the Chinese settlements were on the island before the 12th century. The Chinese and Japanese pirates also frequently used the island as a base of operations, as some Japanese settlements were established there. And the early Chinese settlers were in imminent danger of raids by the Aboriginal peoples who practiced headhunting and coveted Chinese heads, which were thought to be possessions of demonstrated sign of manhood and qualification for marriage. As the early Chinese societies on the island were first organised to a considerable degree on a basis emphasis on security. However, there were any infringement among frequent contact among the Chinese settlers, and there were no common government or body of laws. In 1517, a Portuguese ship sailed through the Taiwan Strait, and the ship's log recorded the words of Ilha Formosa, meaning beautiful island, in Portuguese. Formosa subsequently became the Western term for Taiwan. Well, this ship did not stop there, as the Portuguese did not lay claim to Taiwan. In 1622, the Dutch forces landed on the Penghu Islands, which the Portuguese had called the pescadores, or fishermen, because a large portion of the population were engaged in fishing and established a presence there. And the next year, the Chinese official gave the Dutch a trading post on Taiwan and other privilege in exchange for leaving the Penghu Islands. And in 1622, the Spanish forces seized Geelong or Keelung, as it can also be known as, and expanded their presence on the island from there, as Japanese settlers on the island left shortly thereafter. And in 1642, Dutch forces were expelled by the Spanish, and put a rebellion by the Chinese inhabitants down, and with the help of the Aboriginal peoples, established control over the entire island, and as a result, Taiwan became a Dutch colony, governed by the Dutch East India Company. As the Dutch did expel the Spanish, as the company dug wells, conducted land surveys, and created a basis for expanding commerce, including trade with China and other places in East Asia. And it introduced a new farm implements and the use of oxen to till the fields, In addition, its representation developed a written language for the Aboriginal peoples and converted many to Christianity. And during the Dutch period, the Chinese population in Taiwan shrank and to smaller than the Aboriginal population. As the Dutch encouraged Chinese immigration through the Chinese, and the Chinese did not give their loyalty to the Dutch, and at the time, the Ming dynasty of China was being threatened by the Manchu, which are inhabitants of Manchuria, now northeastern China. In 1644, they took Beijing, the Ming capital, and established the Qing or Manchu dynasty. Nevertheless, resistance against the Manchu continued in southeastern China, as the pirate leader Zheng Zilong or Chen Qilong took command of the remnant Ming naval forces to battle the Manchu. Zheng, however, switched his loyalty to the Qing dynasty. Zheng's son, Zheng Chenggong or Cheng Chengkung, born in Japan to a Japanese mother, refused to follow after his father and instead launched a prolonged campaign of resistance against the Manchu from bases along the Fujian or Fujian coast of China, but by 1661, however, Zheng had failed in his efforts and he turned his attention to Taiwan. As he took a large number of Chinese to Taiwan, many of whom had enlisted in his army, and later that year, Zheng, whom the Dutch called Zonga, launched an attack on the Dutch stronghold of Zeelandia near present-day Tainan, and laid siege to it as the Dutch surrendered in early 1662, and they evacuated and thus ending the Dutch presence within Taiwan. As this was the first instance of a so-called liberation of a Western colony, as Zheng established a Ming-style government on the island and proclaimed Chinese culture. Its Chinese bureaucratic rule, however, did not work well there, as it was superimposed on a social system that was basically feudal. Zheng did not establish ties with Manchu-ruled China, as he did encourage Chinese immigration to Taiwan. As he promoted commerce and foreign trade, Zheng tried to establish ties with Chinese communities in the Philippines to build support for his continued effort to restore Ming rule in China, but he died suddenly in June 1662 before he could act further on those plans. And after him, his son Zhengjing or Changqing operated from a power base in Fuzhou province, fired with his uncle in Taiwan for succession as Zheng won. And like his father and grandfather, he fought the Manchu, but failed and retreated to Taiwan, as his early death was followed by court intrigue in Taiwan, which gave the Manchu in China an opportunity to invade and take the island, which they did in 1683. And for the next 2 centuries, Taiwan was governed by the Fujian province, as a king government sent officials to rule Taiwan, who did not regard their assignments highly, as they considered Taiwan beyond the pale of Chinese civilization, and as a period of Chinese governance was first characterized by frequent rebellions, followed by severe punishments meted out by the government to keep order. As the inhabitants of Taiwan were not happy about the rule by the Chinese, his ruthlessness was partly due to the fact that the Qing government was dominated by the foreign Manchu and not Han Chinese, as the Manchu feared the Chinese-ness of Taiwan, while China was experiencing increasing encouragement from Western powers. And after the First Opium War of 1839-42, during which British forces defeated the Chinese, the Qing government came to see Taiwan as strategically important. And after the war, the region's commerce with the West increased rapidly, which gave rise to foreign designs on Taiwan, including those of Japan, especially after it acquired the Ryukyu Islands just north of Taiwan in 1879, later on those of the United States, and after the French forces blockaded Taiwan's port during the Sino-French War in 1883–85, Southeast Asia, China focused more attention on Taiwan, and in 1885 the Qing government directed Lu Mingchuan, or Ling Mingchuan, the governor of Fujian, to focus his attention to Taiwan, and 2 years later Taiwan was elevated to the status of a province, as Lu undertook reforms in Taiwan, built the island's first railroad, and improved roads and harbours as Taiwan prospered, which engendered friendly feelings towards China by this stage, but Lu met opposition at the Qing court and was called prematurely. Historians both in Taiwan and mainland China have regarded both Lu and Zheng highly. In 1894, China and Japan went to war over conflict and interest within Korea, as Japan won the conflict handily, and the Treaty of Semonoseki in 1895, which ended the war, containing a provision that ceded Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to Japan in perpetuity, and the Western powers regarded the treaty as legally binding, but China did not, seeing as an argument agreed, imposed, and under duress. And when the news of the treaty reached Taiwan, local leaders proclaimed the Republic of Taiwan, Asia's first republic, but it was brief, lasting only about 10 days, as they had no central government, and was plagued by warlordism, causing many residents of the island to flee, fear that Japanese war rule would be improved, and had neither a recognized leader or a real military, as Japan was determined to make Taiwan a colony, so it dealt fairly with opposing movements on the island, as Japan's military had to government the island, but within 3 years the forces were seen as being no longer necessary, as Taiwan was Tokyo's first attempt at colonialism, was an experiment in which Japan had great success in establishing order, eradicating disease, and building infrastructure in a modern economy, as Taiwan soon became the most advanced place in East Asia outside of Japan. Japan's foreign policy makers focused on agriculture first and improved rice production with new seeds and farming techniques, as rice and sugar were exported, as Taiwan had about 30 miles or 50 kilometers of railroad when Japan took over the island, but within a decade it increased the track length by about 300 miles or 500 kilometers, and much more construction was planned, as Taiwan was soon electrified, which facilitated the growth of new industries such as textiles and chemicals, as World War I was boon for Taiwan's economy, as new industries were developed and trade expanded, as World War II also seemed to have a positive impact on the island's economy. While on the other hand, Japan ruled Taiwan strictly, using harsh punishments to enforce the law, as Tokyo initially at least showed no interest of making Taiwan a democracy. Moreover, in governing Taiwan, Japan experienced a dilemma over which to make the colony a part of Japan, or sought to be administratively separate and some degree of self-governing. Ultimately, Tokyo resisted assimilating Taiwan, although it did not force the population there to learn Japanese and absorb Japanese culture. That strategy had advantages for the people of Taiwan, as it gained access to science and technology, but such advantages came at the cost of suppressing local culture and the Chinese language. And in 1935, after Lin Xiantang of Taiwan's Home Rule Association advocated the transfer of more political power to local officials. Japan announced the establishment of somewhat autonomous local government. An election was held and there was some evidence for the beginnings of a democratic government within Taiwan. As the movement was short-lived, however, as the militarists in Japan rose to power the following year. And in 1937, after Japan invaded China, it started the Second Sino-Japanese War as the Chinese inhabitants of Taiwan, were given an option of moving back to China. Very few did, and in the period before the war, the Pacific widened to include the United States and their allies in 1941, and the Japanese came to regard Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, as a important stepping stone in its military expansion, as Japan established military bases there and used them as a staging areas for invasion to the Philippines and other areas to the south, as the Taiwanese worked in Japan's defences and war-related industries within Taiwan, abetted Japan war efforts in Japan. As many Taiwanese served in the Japanese military, including units that fought in China, as the Taiwanese troops even participated in the atrocities against Chinese civilians at Nanking and other places on the mainland, and all the Taiwanese who served in Japanese military, more than 30,000 were killed in combat. And during the last months of the war, Allied military strategists discussed a plan to invade Taiwan, as they abandoned the plan, however, when it discovered that the US military had a few good maps of the island, and after they concluded that Taiwanese would fight alongside the Japanese troops, as the US warplanes bombed oil storage depots and other strategic sites within Taiwan, but little damage was done to the island otherwise. An earlier declaration after the First Cairo Conference of 1943, United States and Britain concurred with Chinese nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek that Taiwan was a territory Japan had taken from China, and therefore would be returned to China. As the decision was confirmed at the Potsdam Conference in July to August 1945, as the US forces did present Taiwan in 1945 to accept the Japanese surrender there, turned over the control of the island to Chiang, and however an official or legal dispensation regarding Taiwan waited the peace treaty, as Taiwan's Chinese population would then welcome the end of the Japanese rule and the restoration of the island to Chinese control, but they were also apprehensive as communist forces of Mao Zedong that were at war with Chiang's nationalist armies in China had almost no contact with Taiwan, as the American public wanted its troops to come home, and the US government was focused more on problems in Europe than in Asia, as Taiwan became a part of the Republic of China on the 25th of October 1945, which has been celebrated since retrocession day. However, Taiwan was not made a standard province of China at the time, as most people on the island had expected. Moreover, Chiang Kai-shek appointed Chen Yi, or Governor General of the island, with powers similar to those that had been exercised by the Japanese military governors. And finally, Japanese officials, administrations and technicians departed, leaving a vacuum that was not easy to fill, as Taiwan's economy, which had become linked to Japan's, had been reorganized, as Japanese law, custom and much more had been replaced, as Chen, like many others in his administrations and many other nationalist Chinese soldiers sent to Taiwan at the time, regarded Taiwanese as traitors, tainted by inferior Japanese culture, as Chen hailed from the Fujian or Fujian province and could speak both Mainland or Taiwanese and Japanese, and he refused to do so, however, believing that the Taiwanese should learn Mandarin, which many of them found difficult. Chen took a few Taiwanese into his government, especially in jobs of importance, as he hoped that he and his administration could govern the moral example, but many of his subordinates were incompetent or corrupt. As just as Chen and his people espoused condescending views towards the Taiwanese, the latter viewed the newly arrived mainland Chinese as dirty, dishonest and technologically backward, as the Taiwanese could see that the new government lacked the technical expertise to run public services, did not like the new legal system imposed on them, and especially the provisions that allowed the forced occupation of the property that led to legal claims on it. Thus, the Taiwanese came to view the government as a carpet bagger to be despised. Meanwhile, Chiang was preoccupied with a civil war against communists, and he felt the residents of Taiwan should understand his situation and be willing to sacrifice, as most Taiwanese did not understand, and they were dismayed by the economic deterioration in Taiwan, as well as the turn of eradicated diseases, falling educational standards, ill treatment of citizens by the government. Ill feelings came to head in February 1947, when a government agent knocked onto the ground a woman who was selling black market cigarettes, and agents then fired into an angry crowd that assembled, killing a bystander. May he rest in peace. As widespread civil disobedience ensued, creating what seemed to be a rebellion, as mainland Chinese were attacked, beaten and killed in large numbers, as Hokkien Taiwanese killed people who could not speak to them in Minnan, including many Hakka, and the event became known as Ba, or 228, for the incident's date, 28th of February, as a memorial park was established in Taipei in the 90s to commemorate the incident. And in March, Chiang sent troops to Taiwan to end the chaos, as the soldiers used the weapons at will, often against civilians who were unarmed, seemingly in revenge. As punitive actions were taken against anyone thought to be organising trouble, as order was restored, but not before thousands were killed, including the core of Taiwan's potential local political and social leadership. As Chiang subsequently relieved Chen of his post, rescinded military rule, and appointed a number of Taiwanese to top political jobs, as many government monopoly enterprises were sold and efforts were made to alleviate unemployment, as the actions helped ameliorate a bad situation, but not before considerable damage had been done, including the creation of hostile feelings towards Chen and government and in mainland China. And in late 1949, Mao Zedong's communist armies had defeated Chiang's forces in the mainland, and Chiang and his government, the Nationalist Party of Kuomintang, or KMT, the military knows, were compelled to flee, as most went to Taiwan with Chiang, as the influence of some 1.5 million people put strains on Taiwan's struggling economy and further exacerbated ethnic tensions. As Chiang had Chen executed in public and took measures to root out corruption from the KMT and the government. However, the actions retained him with the Taiwanese only slightly, as the United States abandoned Chiang at this time, but it reversed this policy with the outbreak of the Korean War in 1950, as the US President Harry S. Truman sent the US 7th Fleet to Taiwan Strait to prevent an invasion of the island by communist armies from the mainland. And at the time, due to the divide between the United States and the Soviet Union, the world split into communist and capitalist democratic blocs, as Chiang stood within the latter bloc, as the United States and other Western countries supported his government's bid to represent China diplomatically and in the United Nations, UN and various other international organizations, as Chiang pledged to invade and retake the mainland and used that goal to justify prospering democracy and perpetuating his minority mainland Chinese government. And he also used various policies and the security of US military protection to focus on Taiwan's economic development, as Chiang thus won the support of the Taiwanese, and as he succeeded, he also won their political allegiance to some extent, as many Taiwanese came to feel that only by working with the mainland Chinese-controlled government could Taiwan become secure and prosperous, as Taiwan economy took off in the mid-60s and grew rapidly in the following decades, causing Taiwan to become known as the economic miracle, as Chiang and his team of economic planners, including Li Guoding, got the credit as they engineered growth from which everyone benefited, as consumerism and prosperity were hallmarks of the time, while mainland China languished economically undermined with ill-advised programs like the Great Leap Forward in 1958-60. Although economic growth, which had produced a middle class in Taiwan, coupled with relatively free local elections, served as a basis for establishing more democratic governance within Taiwan, though democratic reforms occurred later than initially, according to Chiang's critics, as Chiang's dream of taking back mainland and again ruling there dimmed in time, as two crises in the 50s over Matsu and Guamini Islands, controlled by Taiwan in the waters of Fujian province in China, involved intervention by the US Navy, that led to the United States and Taiwan to conclude a mutual defense treaty in 1956, as the United States thereby offered Taiwan military protection, but also sought to constrain Chiang from starting a war with mainland China. By the end of the 60s, however, Washington was viewing better relationships with Beijing as a way to help get itself out of Vietnam, and the administration of President Nixon moved accordingly, as Beijing replaced Taipei in the UN in 1971, and following year Nixon visited mainland China, inviting other countries to seek better and more formal relations with Beijing, as Taiwan became diplomatically isolated. As Chiang died in April 1975, as he made Taiwan prosperous and put it on the tracks to becoming a democracy, but failed to his efforts to use Taiwan's baits from which to liberate the mainland from communism, as Mao died a year later, ending a personal feud that had dominated much of China's 20th century history. Upon Chiang Kai-shek's death in 1975, his vice president, Yan Jiangan became president, as Yan, however, was made a caretaker president, as Chiang's eldest son, Chiang Kai-shek was headed by the KMT and had a base of support in the military, the police, and the intelligence organizations, wielded real political power. As Yan understood the political reality, and he and Chiang worked together. When Yan's then terminated in 1978, Chiang was elected president, and in the meantime he was made important decisions as premier, as Chiang Ching-kuo, or CCK, to his friends, had been sent to the Soviet Union in his youth. He joined the Communist Party there, supported Leon Trotsky, and married a Russian woman, as the credentials had hardly constituted an appropriate background for running a country that was on the verge of democratizing, nor were his jobs working with his father on the basis of support. But CCK understood that Taiwan needed to become democratic to survive its diplomatic isolation, to finally heal internal ethnic ill will, and to continue with rapid economic growth. As Chiang also a man of high standards, as he launched an anti-corruption campaign that was taken seriously, especially when he jailed some renowned top-ranking officials, including his relatives, as he forced austerity on the government and set rules that made the government transparent and open to Taiwan's citizens. At the time, he used edicts to more quickly push the pace of democratization, and good government. In December 1978, US President Jimmy Carter announced, while prior warning that US would not end its formal diplomatic ties with Taiwan and normalize relations with mainland China, as his move was a severe shock to Taiwan. Many of its people felt betrayed and angry. Moreover, the move led other countries to rush to sever diplomatic ties with Taiwan in favour of the mainland, thus further increasing Taiwan's political isolation. But CCK kept Taiwan from reacting and pursued democratization even more relentlessly, as he negotiated with the opposition and arrived to an understanding in 1980, which made possible Taiwan's first competitive national election, as he also supported Taiwan Relations Acts passed by the US Congress in early 1979, which reserved non-diplomatic relations with the US, as CCK oversaw another legislative election in 1983, and the formation of a real opposition party as the Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, in 1986, which was followed a year later by Taiwan's first ever two-party election, the first in Chinese history, and in 1987 he ended martial law and the ban on travel to mainland China, a move that will lead to personal and economic contacts across the Taiwan Strait for the first time since 1949. As relationships with Beijing improved, though CCK rejected an offer by Deng Xiaoping or Teng Xiaoping in 1982 resolved the Taiwan issue by using the one country two system formula that had been devised for a return of Hong Kong to China, as he argued that it would make the Republic of China a local government. As Chiang had also contended with an unique between the administration of Ronald Reagan and Beijing in August of that year, in which the United States agreed to reduce arms sales to Taiwan with the ultimate aim of ending them, as few countries were willing to sell weapons to Taiwan, and it needed US weapons. As a countermeasure, CK launched a program to build Taiwan's own jet fighter plane called the Indigenous Defense Fighter, or IDF, as the first plane was completed in 1988 and the fourth wave went into production. It helped Taiwan maintain air superiority over the island and Taiwan Straits, as the IDP was extremely expensive to build. Unfortunately, as Chiang put Taiwanese persons into position of importance in their KMT in the government, one of them was Li Tonghe, or Ling Denghui, a hacker whom CCK made his vice presidential running mate in his successive bid for re-election in 1984. As for some time, Chiang had been in poor health and had died in January 1988, before the end of his second term, as he was seen to have brought integrity to Taiwan's politics and have democratized the country, which had launched what became known as Taiwan's political miracle, as he furthered its economic miracle. With respect to Taiwan citizens, viewed Chiang lasted into the 21st century, with public opinion polls indicating that most people continue to believe that he'd been Taiwan's best president. As Li Tenghui assumed the presidency following Chiang Ching-kuo's death, and according to the constitution, he was also CCK's chosen successor, but Li was Taiwanese, though Hakka, and he was not trusted by the mainland Chinese old guard, and he tried to block his acquiring too much power by supporting the rotating party leader, James Soong, a young, by Chinese standards, mainland Chinese, the Secretary General of the KMT, took Li's side and warned that obstructing Li's assumption of political authority would bring chaos and send the wrong signal to Taiwan's economic partners. Soong won the day, and in July 1988, Li was officially elected chairman of the party at the 13th Congress. Li formed a new cabinet in which the first time included a Taiwanese majority, as Li advanced new rules for conducting party business, thereby further democratizing the party, as he picked Li Huan mainland Chinese to be its premier. Meanwhile, in May 1988, farmers took to the streets to protest low prices for their products as more than 500 people went into protests. Subsequently, other groups engaged in street politics, and at the time, 150 public protests a month as Taiwan supported the subsequent movement in Beijing's Tiananmen Square in the spring of 1989, though it was not tangible in any way. The students in Taiwan announced support for their counterparts in Beijing as President Lee talked to them in public and listened to their views. In early 1990, Lee was elected for a second term as president, though he was briefly challenged by Ling Yang-kang and Chiang Wei-kuo, who was Chiang Kai-shek's second son and CCK's half-brother. And in 1998, President Lee terminated temporary provisions, forced with the retirement of the elder parliamentarians, those representing districts on the mainland, or replacements by appointments. The National Assembly and the Legislative Yuan, Taiwan held its first non-supplementary National Assembly election, which helped push democratization a big step forward. As Lee's KMT won an election, they did not perform as well as it would in the Legislative Assembly's elections the following year, as President Lee had to deal with serious factionalism in the KMT, as some members of the party felt that Lee was promoting Taiwanism too much and disregarded his policies towards an independent Taiwan. And a number left the party to form the Chinese New Party, subsequently renamed the New Party, as Lee also had to cope with economically booming mainland China. His policy in dealing with Taiwan's business community, which had been enlarging his investments and trade with the mainland, was to encourage those businesses to pursue opportunities in Southeast Asia instead, which he called the Go South policy. And after 1990, Lee also had to deal with the mainland's growing military power, and in 1992, Lee was able to improve Taiwan's military situation when he negotiated offers to purchase advanced fighter planes from the United States, like F-16s, and France's Mirage 2005s, as Taiwan bought aircraft from both countries. In 1994, Lee supported James Soong when the latter ran for a position of governor of Taiwan. As the first direct elections for the office, Soong won easily, and Lee at the same time pushed through a constitutional amendment providing for a directly elected president. Thereupon, Lee decided to run for another term and was re-elected in 1996 in what was the first direct election for the top leader of any Chinese entity in history, as Lee and his running mate, Lin Chan or Li Xian, won a majority of the votes against three other sets of candidates. In 1995, before the election, Lee travelled to the United States to address gathering of graduate school alumni at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, where he had received a doctorate in 1968. As the trip was a success, although the US Department of State tried to marginalize Lee's visit in an effort to avoid annoying Beijing, Lee's visit earned his good press in the United States, nonetheless angered Beijing, whose leaders saw Lee as trying to legally separate Taiwan from mainland China, and shortly thereafter the People's Liberation Army conducted threatening missile test campaign. In reaction, US President Bill Clinton dispatched US warships to the Strait, leading to potential explosive face-off with mainland China as the conflict-laden situation did die down, but not before it drew attention to Taiwan's status as a serious problem in US-China relations. And at the time, Lee engineered more flexibility in Taiwan's foreign policy by putting emphasis on informal contact with other countries and regional and international agencies, as he also increased Taiwan's foreign aid to establish or keep up relations with developing countries, as those efforts yielded some results, but they were hardly enough to stem the tide that favoured mainland China over Taiwan in their growing contest for influence in the world. In 1998, the KMT performed well in local elections, including Taipei mayoral race, in which the party candidate Ma Ying-jeou defeated Chen Shuoban of the DPP with Li's help, as Li's term of office neared an end in 1999, and he angered Beijing again when he called for state-to-state relations, thus suggested that Taiwan was sovereign and should therefore be independent, as some said that Li's action was a response to comments President Clinton had made when he was in mainland China the previous year that appeared to refute Taiwan's right to seek a separate future. In September 1999, shortly before Li left office, he had contend a severe earthquake that centered in the middle of the island that killed about 2,400 people and injured thousands more and caused massive property damage. As President Li was known in Taiwan as Mr. Democracy for the positive political change he oversaw, as he certainly demonstrated that when he was skillful politician and was able to do much for Taiwan while in office, and even though relations with mainland China were strained during the latter part of his presidency, the mainland's rise was increasingly difficult for Taiwan to cope with. In March 2000, Chen Shuoban, the opposition DPP, won the presidential election, and this was a watershed event as the KMT had been in power for more than half a century, and some hailed the election as a final step in Taiwan's process towards democratizing and establishing a majority rule. Others called it a fluke, however, as the latter viewed the supported by the Chen won. President Li Tenghui backed his vice president Lian Chan for the KMT's presidential nomination. However, third candidate, former Taipei Governor James Soong, had the best preference poll numbers, far ahead of Lian's and Chen's. Hence, Soong ran as an independent and might have well won the election, except that during the campaign, Li and other top members of the KMT accused Soong of having absconded with party funds. When he was Secretary General of the KMT, this accusation hurt his reputation badly. Soong was also at a disadvantage by not having a political party and not having sufficient funds to run his campaign, and in any case, Soong was running as an independent and ended up splitting the Conservative vote. As Chen ran a highly effective campaign in the Fukien Taiwanese, women and young people and the poor and those who believe that Taiwan should be legally separate from China. In addition, he was charismatic, as Soong was also a consummate politician, won only a small percentage less than Chen. In a final vote tally, Soong won more votes than all of Taiwan's ethnic minority, like mainland Chinese, Hakka and Aboriginal people. And from when hence Chen was elected with less than half of the popular vote, and which was not considered a mandate by many observers, as the DPP also lacked a majority in the legislature, which meant a divided government and a difficult job ahead for Chen. Sneeze. As Chen nevertheless started out his term well, as his approval poll numbers ranging upwards of 70%, but in his efforts to build an effective ruling coalition failed. He resorted to playing ethnic politics, as one of the president's tactics was to create a political crisis by cancelling work on a nuclear plant that the previous legislature had authorized. As concerned about electricity shortages and a general paralysis in government, and loss of confidence in the business community contributed to the economy's falling to recession in 2001. In 2001, Li Tenghui left the KMT and formed Taiwan's Solidarity Union, which aligned itself with Chen, as James Soong set up the People's First Party and aligned itself with Lian, who by then was heading the KMT. In legislature elections held that year, The DPP won the plurality, but not a majority. He obviously is in the legislature, while Sun's party made bigger gains through a smaller base. As well as President Chen still not command a majority in the legislature, political gridlock became worse, and in 2000, President Chen, his Vice President Annette Liu were re-elected in the high controversial elections as Lian and Sung had teamed up to run against him. And the polls leading to the ballot day showed the opposition duo winning. But less than 24 hours before the polls were to open, both Chen and Liu were shot while campaigning near Chen's hometown. As the wounds were minor, but Chen ordered the police and the military to remain at their posts, which kept them from voting, and it was assumed that most would have voted for Lian or Sung, as Chen and Liu were also helped by a sympathy vote, and the pair won by a razor-thin margin, as the opposition charged that the election had been stolen as political paralysis was even worse, while Chen's people, who had perceived that they would be out of power, soon increased their efforts to cash in on their position. And corruption had already worsened dramatically, and during the first term, office Chen was antagonized Beijing when it called for Taiwan's independence in order to solidify its support base, the Fujian Taiwanese, and on September 11th, 2001, attacks in United States engaged in a war in the Middle East did not welcome Chen's provocation, and US President George W. Bush, who until then had been a close friend of Taiwan, now made caustic comments about Chen's administration and regarded Chen as a loose cannon and Taiwan as no longer a loyal ally because of the domestic political gridlock. Purchases of American arms were held up by Taiwan's legislature at a time when mainland China continued to put more missiles in place to attempt to intimidate Taiwan. Moreover, mainland attracted Taiwan's businesses with investments and trade opportunities. As a cumulative effect of the developments was to discredit the Chen presidency, and late in Chen's second term, Xu Mingte, a former DPP chairman known as Taiwan's Nelson Mandela, having served longer in prison than any other DPP member during the KMT rule from 1966 to 77, and in 1980 to 90, organised mass public protests against Chen, citing his poor governance and massive corruption. Indictments of a large number of Chen administrative officials, including Chen's wife, made the situation worse for the president, as Chen's public approval poll numbers fell into single digits, as Chen ended his presidency in disgrace, as the hallmarks of his administration were extreme corruption, worsening ethnic relations, and deteriorating relations with mainland China and the United States, as he did some serious damage to his party, the DPP, and its leadership, and some even feared the future of the party. After Chen left the presidency, he was not allowed to leave Taiwan, and in late 2009 he was sentenced to life in prison and fined $6.13 billion after he and his wife were convicted of embezzlement, receiving bribes and money laundering involving a total of about $15 million, and Chen's friends and relatives provided evidence against him in court, as did legal authorities of the United States and several other countries, as Taiwan's High Court subsequently reviewed the case and reduced the sentence, but Chen remained in prison. First, Chen still had a significant following, as a conviction signalled that Chen's influence in the KMT had ended, and by going on hunger strike, complaining ill treatment in prison, and appealing his sentence, Chen remained under media scrutiny in ensuing years, as this worked to the advantage of the KMT and hurt the DPP. In 2008, KMT won both presidential and legislative elections by large margins, and Ma Ying-jeou, a former mayor of Taipei, once Minister of Justice, was elected president, as Ma, who had now had a law degree from Harvard and a reputation for being the cleanest of Taiwan's political elite, was respected and popular. As during the campaign, he had pledged good economic growth, better ethnic relations, good government, clean government and cold relations with mainland China and the United States, as the US government was indeed pleased with Ma as president, principally because he reduced tensions in the Taiwan Strait and by pursuing cordial relations with Beijing rather than provoking their leaders. And in the process, the Taiwan Strait was downgraded from a former status as a former flashpoint of the world, defined as a place where conflict between two powers, in this case the United States and mainland China, might be involved might involve the weapons of mass destruction. Like, Beijing was also pleased and it set in motion policies to dramatically improve relations with Taiwan. But in 2009, Taiwan fell victim to worldwide recession, which caused negative economic growth on the island. Also that year, a devastating tropical cyclone, Typhoon Morakot, hit Taiwan, and nearly 500 people were killed, or at least listed as missing, as Ma espoused a political that responding to the tragedy was largely local government responsibility, as the public, however, was ultimately dissatisfied with the response of Ma's government, as the Ma's popularity plummeted as a result. Meanwhile, the opposition, in a state of shock and disarray after two election defeats in early 2008, began to make a comeback. And the leadership of Tsai Ing-wen, a former vice premier, she was a moderated DPP policies. It improved party morale, and we saw some wins in local and replacement elections. And in 2010, Ma's approval rating rose in public opinion polls, buoyed by very impressive improvements in Taiwan's economical growth. Ma was able to negotiate an economic cooperation framework agreement with mainland China, which reduced tariffs on the mainland's and Taiwan's exports to each other. And it was the first in a series of economic and financial agreements concluded between Taiwan and the mainland over several years that continued to build economic ties between the two. In 2011, Taiwan observed the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Republic of China, but by then, economic growth had fallen off sharply, helping to fuel mounting discontent among voters. In January 2012, Ma won a second presidential term, defeating the DPP's Tsai Ing-wen. Moreover, the KMT retained a majority in the legislature despite losing 17 seats in the election. Tsai took responsibility for electoral loss and resigned as head of DPP, but Ma's popularity and that of the KMT went into decline as the economy continued to stagnate and complaints of poor governance mounted. And the public grew uneasy over Taiwan's increasingly close relations with mainland China, and many saw an endangering Taiwan's sovereignty. Small general elections of the decline of Ma and the KMT's brand of elitist moral leadership had waned and overwhelmed by the DPP's populism, as popular protests among movements grew at the time, including new monofong occupation of the legislative yuan by the student-led groups seeking to block the legislature ratifying a trade agreement with Beijing, as Tsai was re-elected chair of the DPP in 2014. In elections that year, DPP candidates ousted several incumbent KMT mayors, including those in a special municipalities as Taipei, Taichung and Taoyuan, as the elections constituted the majority victory of the DPP. And a serious setback for the KMT. The outcome mirrored further deterioration in the image of President Ma and the KMT. Tsai Ing-wen's adroit leadership of the DPP then continued the rise of populism, as appeal of DPP and its good candidates at the local level and the voters concerned over local economic inequalities, the increasing dependence on mainland China, as many observers viewed the outcome as a signal that the DPP would win the national election and the legislative elections in January 2016, as toward the end of Ma's presidency in November 2015, he met the Chinese President Xi Jinping the first ever encounter between the heads of two governments, while Ma's diplomatic effort did not, according to the opinion polls taken at the time, influence how voters may cast their ballots in the upcoming elections. It was viewed very